Hi all. Back now for some more of Walking on Cinders. This will be chapter 11 of my novel, Walking on Cinders. There are 32 chapters in total, I believe, and an epilogue in this, so we're going to continue reading these at 6 p.m. every night during the isolation. It's been quite a nice day today. Been out in the garden. We've been feeling good today, so it's not too bad, although isolation is getting to us a little bit. Don't think we'll all know what to do with ourselves when we leave the house finally for the first time after all this is over. But stay home, stay safe, and hopefully you enjoy this chapter 11 of my book, Walking on Cinders. Chapter 11. Even with the best of navigation skills, the toughest of soldiers can find themselves lost in some foreign field, amongst foreign trees and on foreign soil. This was a situation that Chris and Thomas had been battling for several hours. At first, Chris believed that they could do no wrong in their expedition, for if they followed the road to its end, he was sure they would find civilization. But he had been wrong. The road had led them round twisting corners, narrow bends, through fertile farmland and past a deep patch of dark forest, but they had not yet found any form of human life. In fact, it was only on the third day of their journey, after spending 2 uncomfortable nights sleeping under hedgerows, that Thomas noticed a few scattered dwellings on the horizon. They had just passed out into the open when a small cottage and a dilapidated barn became visible. They didn't seem to be that far in the distance. Maybe they could reach the buildings before the day was out. Perhaps it was the thought of a huge leap forwards that spurred them on, or that they might now find little direction in this strange world. Whatever it was, the pace of the two, walking across the deep green fields, increased considerably. An hour went by, and then another, and slowly the buildings got closer. Now they could almost see the flakes of paint falling from the front door. "If we can just get to the cottage," Chris called to Thomas, who was trundling on a few metres behind, while trying fruitlessly to dodge every rabbit hole. "They might be able to give us directions to the French barracks." Although the ground became more and more boggy and the grass grew taller, they made steady progress, and soon the comrades came upon a large and prickly bramble hedge that marked the field boundary. "Well, how are we going to pass through?" Thomas questioned, quickly looking right and then left as if watching a tennis rally. From his point of view, there was no way ahead. "There's a solution to every problem," Chris answered. He appeared unfazed and was not even tired from the long days of walking. He showed no visible signs of fatigue. Taking his penknife from the pocket of his rucksack and flicking the blade so that it sparkled in the sunlight of the late afternoon, Chris Aston began to cut away at the brambles and thorns that faced him. He was presently surprised to find how easily they fell away, for most of them were dead to start with. It didn't take long to hack a clear pathway, although by no means an easy job, and by the time he was through, thorns had cut into the palms of his hands. But he could see the ditch below, and he knew they could easily jump across it, passing their rucksacks on afterwards. Hedge negotiated, they stood in the cottage garden and immediately saw that the building might be deserted. Grass had grown to knee-height through the gravel, while the branches of the trees grew thick against the windows, and flowers drooped down towards the ground, the last of the light sucked by the weeds above. But they had come this far, and they were not going to return without knocking at the front door. Chris rapped hard 3 times. For a long moment there was no answer, and they were about to turn away when a voice called out from within. "Hello?" It was a surprisingly deep voice with a thick French accent. "Who is it?" Thomas heard the latch in the lock, but he didn't think for a moment there might be any sort of danger lurking there behind. The door opened inwards with an eerie creak, and there stood an aging man with a thick grey beard and deep-set eyes. At his feet growled an angry bulldog for whom the open door was a release. Immediately, the creature bounded forwards, a look of evil across its features, and it only jumped at them in turn, leaving dusty paw prints across all of their tattered trousers. The man looked at them without a care. His eyes were hard and filled with malice, a cold and uninviting stare. He spoke through gritted teeth. His lips were almost completely closed. "What is it that you want?" The man addressed Chris eye to eye, while Thomas tried in vain to prise the bulldog away from his sore feet. "This is private property," he continued, "and you are trespassing on my land." Chris took each and every situation in his stride, and this was no exception. He realised there was something familiar behind the gaze of the old man's stare. He saw the same emptiness, the same sadness that he had only ever witnessed in the eyes of his fellows. This was familiar. Any sense of worry evaporated. "You were a soldier?" he asked bluntly, hoping not for a reaction, but simply for some kind of recognition. Thomas was intrigued by his friend's tact. He stood there, waiting for the man to reply, wondering where the situation would take them next. The man in the doorway, who before seemed so hard and bitter in his approach, withdrew a little. He did not understand how the young man knew, but surely there was no point in denying it. Eventually, the expected response would arrive. He began, stuttering over the words. "How did you know?" Chris pondered over the question for a moment. "Well, when you have been through it," he began, never drawing his eyes away. "When you have fought for that cause and endured far worse than unspeakable pain, you begin to develop a sense about others who have done the same." Thomas looked at his friend for a moment and wondered how he could have felt such things. Yes, they had fought alongside each other, but he had no such sense. He continued because he had to, because it was his duty. "In the eyes," Chris continued, realising that it only made sense in his own mind. "It's in the eyes that you see it. Some unbearable pain and emptiness that you will know if only you have lived through it. It sounds silly, but it really is as simple as that." The man smiled, his face warming with that simple movement of his lips, and slowly he reached out a hand in greeting. His guard had dropped, but they had passed the threshold that was his emptiness. "I'm Lieutenant James Becamp. I am Lieutenant Jack Burkamp, 3rd Division of the French Infantry de Marine, light infantry," said the man. "It's been a long time and I have a tendency to forget things." "It comes as a matter of course," Chris replied, taking in the derelict cottage and its surroundings. Well, you got to learn to live with it, but I can keep this little place in good order and myself too." Thomas stared at the lieutenant. Chris shot him a glance and Thomas shrugged his shoulders. Maybe this man was mentally unstable. He wasn't getting involved. Turning away from the others, Thomas kicked the dusty ground with the toe of his boot and wondered how they'd ever got so desperate they needed to ask an old soldier with obvious mental scars for shelter and directions. "Have you no family, Monsieur Burchamp?" Chris asked, hoping to alleviate his squalid conditions. "None. They have all passed away or left. It is just me here and the dog for company, just as I like it." "We're looking for the nearest army barracks," Thomas interrupted. The smile fell from the lieutenant's face and he drew a little further back into his cottage. Well, I should have known that you were. They are around here, just over the hills. You are not far at all. But I haven't been down there in many years." "We know we were close," Chris responded quickly, so as to stop Thomas from ruining the situation any further. "It's just that we are tired from walking and we really wanted somewhere to rest for the night before continuing." He felt he had to rectify the situation. Said it out simply. Well," the old man began again. "I can help you with that. If you can keep it to yourself that I am here, I have food in the cottage and room for you to sleep through the long night ahead. It is nothing much, but you are soldiers of my own breed, and I will do what I can to help. There is an old phone line in the cottage. I shall ring ahead and warn of your arrival. But if they start to ask questions, you have to keep quiet." "If you want it that way," Chris said. He watched the lieutenant move from the doorway and followed him into the cottage. "We will never speak again of your generosity." Thomas had a funny look on his face, but he followed obediently, shutting the door behind him and leaving the bulldog barking on the other side. "As that may be," the lieutenant warned as he led the way through tiny rooms where plaster was crumbling from the walls and old newspapers were piled to the ceiling. It was no more than Chris and Thomas were expecting. "But I will give you some advice. Be careful, keep your back covered and never trust anyone. The life of a soldier is a dangerous one. If you want to save yourself, you may have to sacrifice someone else. It is the way of the world and I know it." For a long time afterwards, Chris wondered about these words. They rang around and around in his head like a prophecy, which was stupid because he had heard it all before, many times. But this was different. Now it felt real and raw. After all they had been through, there was still a real chance that one of them might die. Battles could be just around the corner, and the best that they could hope for was, again, survival. These were dangerous thoughts too, so Chris tried to place them at the back of his mind, lock them away and concentrate on getting a good night's sleep, something he had missed in the long days before. It would be a welcome escape, a positive distraction, and he would lose himself in it. time spent lost between one rolling green hill and the next can easily cause confusion after walking continuously for several days, sleeping out under the stars with only the hedgerows for company. The journey north, for that was the direction in which they believed they were heading, led Ewan and Jennifer down towards the bank of a river at the bottom of a cornfield. There the water was cool and clear. They could see stones at the bottom and tadpoles, which were swimming silently between the reeds. It was peaceful, and like a lot of rural France, sandwiched between the green of the hills and the field crops. Very often, the pair had found themselves walking for hours across the same terrain, so that it seemed as though they were getting nowhere at all. This was when they thought about the others. Time and again they wondered if they had made it to a military base yet. The ripples in the water reflected the light from the sun, high on its journey towards noon, and Ewan took a moment to focus upon the woman lying next to him. "Are we ever going to find the village?" he asked in frustration, his eyes now meeting with the striking blue glow of Jennifer's own. She too was frustrated with their progress, and it was merely by reading her expression that he realised they both knew it might be some time yet before they were discovering a route to the promised land. "We've been walking for 3 days, Ewan," his partner spoke with a little caution in her voice. "If we don't find it soon, then we've been walking around in circles. We've got this map, but all that's done so far is send us in a general direction, and the night sky is never clear enough for us to even try and read the stars." They thought on the same wavelength, another thing that they had in common. "But finding this river has got to be a good sign," Ewan remarked, taking her hand and dropping it playfully into the cold of the water. "If we follow the path to the river, then eventually we'll find civilization. And if we come across a road, then that's even better." Jennifer leaned over and kissed his forehead. It was her reassurance. What else could she do? Ultimately, she knew he was right, but it was so difficult to take in. The sudden change from her city life and his youthful exuberance scared her. That morning they had eaten some dried fruit and drank the last of their instant hot chocolates, but it was not enough. They didn't set you up for a day's heavy trekking, and she knew, as well as Ewan, that it couldn't go on the way that it was for much longer. Jennifer was almost too tired to think. "I suppose we can give it one more push," she whispered in his ear, bowing to his wishes. "If we follow the river until it reaches a road, then we should be okay. But we need to find shelter today, for food and for a good night's sleep, if for nothing else." Ewan looked up again and saw the comfort in her face. "I'm glad you agree, because I trust you. But this place, it's just so beautiful, and it draws you in. You're tired, Ewan. We both need a decent night's rest, and I'm afraid we'll never get that until we reach a village." Jennifer finished and locked hands with him. They were in this together and would be until the end. The soldier nodded again. She was right. She was usually right, and she had been his rock since they had left camp days earlier. Where would he be without her? Such a strong woman, and here he was being a coward. A soldier should be born to lead. He should take charge. But in their current situation, he found that he just could not do it. On the opposite bank, tall grasses grew that provided cover for the pair as they walked. Each small step was tiring, and the river meandered first left and then right, so that it felt as though they were never moving forwards at all. But in time, the grasses petered out, and the flow of the river began to slow. They passed an oxbow lake where the river had cut through the fields and left a curve of water still and clear. They drank and rested for a short while, trying to conserve what little energy that remained. As they again trudged wearily on, following yet another meander in the river's path, they passed a rickety wooden bridge, a simple way to cross from one bank to the other, and they walked further still. Field after field of grazing sheep and resting cows passed by. Cows lay down when it's going to rain, but for Jennifer and Ewan, two lonely travellers, the indicator went unnoticed and the pace slowed again. Rounding the next corner, and almost ready to give up, a familiar sight met their eyes. It was one which convinced them there was still hope and reminded them of the glory of home. Along a dirt track and towards a small brick bridge, which they could just make out in the distance, trundled a rusty red tractor. Big on its wheels, it appeared to be moving at a very slow speed, which meant that they just might be able to catch up with it. Ewan was suddenly filled with a new burst of energy, which propelled him forwards. Here was a glimmer of hope, and he was going to grasp it with both hands. "Come on, Jennifer," he smiled, dropping his heavy rucksack at his feet. "This is our chance." Jennifer followed suit. Their belongings and what had been their lifeline for so many days lay discarded at the water's edge, and together they set off at a jog towards the little stone bridge. Although they were tired beyond belief, their exhaustion did not show. They knew that if they didn't reach this trundling tractor, it could be the end. They might never escape the fields of France. Together they ran downwards towards the little bridge, waving their arms in the air, hoping the driver would see them. Their prayers were answered as the tractor slowed and before long came to a complete stop. Ewan could not contain himself when the cab door opened and a tall, dark-haired man jumped down from the seat. Jennifer immediately noted how dashing he looked, but shelved the thoughts immediately. "Hello?" the man beamed, neither worried nor scared of the approaching strangers. "What are you doing here?" Realising they were not French natives, the farmer drew upon the very little English that he knew, and it was then that he noticed Jennifer. She too had to be the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Scrambling from the riverbank and up the grass verge, she was finding the going difficult. "Mon Dieu, you look so très malade, ill. What happened to you?" "We have no time to explain," Ewan said in a slow and emphasised response, bringing up the rear and finally joining the conversation at Jennifer's side. "But we could do with your help." He felt a little worried about being so blunt with this good Samaritan, but it would be useless to waffle when they really needed the help so badly. "Well, I can see that you need help, mon ami, especially when such a belle fille looks so tired and so pale." Jennifer was strangely pleased to have a new male admirer. It reminded her of Miss Marmalade's professional life. Her head told her to flirt with the man to get what they wanted, yet her heart made sure that she stayed true to her loving companion beside her. "If you don't mind me asking, where are you heading?" "Well, Jennifer broke in without a second thought before being queried by a very cautious glance from her companion. "Needing to get to the nearest village, yes. We're actually looking for the French barracks, which we've been told are located somewhere in this area." The farmer smiled and leaned against his tractor. "Well, the good news is I can help you. I mean to say, it is not exceptional to see the military walking through these fields with such a magnificent, jeune femme, beautiful woman now, is it, eh?" The farmer appeared to be playing a game, trying to work out exactly what the two travellers were up to. "I'm afraid the information is confidential. I'm sure you understand," Ewan said matter-of-factly. "Je vois," the farmer replied, raising his eyebrows. "But when I think something strange is going on, when you have been travelling so long, and it appears you have as it appears you have, then I think you need to give me a little more information." Ewan was flummoxed. Once again, the opposition had got the better of him, and as he looked from Jennifer to the farmer and back again, he realised that neither of them was very pleased with him. "I'll tell you what I'll do," the farmer began again, taking Jennifer by the hand and leading her towards the cab. "I would take you to the village, but from there you are on your own. I do not know what you are doing, garçon, but you had better make sure you look after this belle fille, because I never could resist a beautiful face." Ewan fell completely silent for the first time that afternoon. There was nothing else worth saying, and it was foolish to waste his energy trying. Quickly he nodded and looked around them. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields. The nearest village could be miles away. They had no chance of reaching it on foot before sundown, and Ewan was forced to admit that he had been wrong. "Okay," he murmured almost inaudibly as the farmer smiled and opened the cab door, helping Jennifer to climb inside. Then he jumped down to the road and headed off in the direction of their waiting belongings, leaving Ewan to follow behind, slow and tired, while Jennifer giggled inside the cab, realising just how eventful their little journey had become. So that is chapter 11 of Walking on Cinders, and I apologise greatly for my terrible French accent, but there is plenty more of that to come through the rest of this novel, I'll have you know. So chapter 12 tomorrow night at 6 p.m.